bakery and enjoy Peter's lunch. Yay! Morning light calling is alive. Okay, so make sure you're also watching on the live stream on YouTube. The link is up. Well, it's everywhere in the site today. It's up in events, it's in announcements, and it's in the voice channel general chat. And now, are we ready? Are we all ready to go, Peter? Yeah, yeah? Okay. I'm switching over in three, two, one. Welcome, hi, willkommen to our launch of Warning Light Calling by Peter Graarup Westergaard. My name is Lis. I will be your host for today, and today we have on air live Peter Graarup Westergaard.
Thank you.
Now, and we're just making sure that everything's working perfectly. So, and there we go. We are good. I see myself live. There we are. All right. How are you doing today? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great.
Good. So,
Yes.
what I wanted to do today is start off just with an introduction of you, Peter, and then go and introduce your poetry collection, Warning Light Calling, and then we have some wonderful time to actually listen to you doing your poems. So
That sounds great.
Yeah. For those of us online, we are live on YouTube, and we are also live in our Discord server. The link is down below in the description box, and it's also at vraydamedia.ca. And so you're welcome to join us on Discord, or you're welcome to ask Q&A questions or ask Peter a question at any time in the chat, in the YouTube chat. So we will be monitoring that. And we're ready to roll. So Peter Graarup Westergaard published the poetry collection Nordvest in 2017 and translated it into English as Danish Northwest in 2019 by Troubadour Publishing. He completed his master's in comparative literature at Aarhus University in 2004 and holds a degree in English literature also from Aarhus University in 2015. He also studied English literature at Concordia University in Montreal and philosophy at Oxford University, Department of Continuing Education. He teaches Danish, English, and philosophy at a secondary boarding school in Denmark. Did I get everything? Did I miss
Yes,
anything?
I think you did. I live here in Denmark and I'm Danish, and yeah, I have family as well here. But you got everything at least. Yeah,
Sweet.
that's great.
Excellent.
And thank you for letting me um, let me read this poem here for you, and also thank you for publishing my poetry collection. It's I'm very honored.
Well, we fell in love with it. I loved the sort of science fiction pieces of it. I loved the edge. I loved the philosophy. And of course, I also loved the little nods to the Odyssey, the Iliad. You know, I'm a
Yes.
huge mythology and Hellene literature nut. So for me to kind of see that while at the same time seeing some cyberpunk and some sci-fi in there, I was like,
Mm.
how
Yeah, it's a
fast?
strange mixture of different mythology, but hopefully it will work out for everyone
Oh,
who are interested in reading it or listening to it.
absolutely. Absolutely. Alrighty, so a little bit about warning light calling. The experience of warning light calling returns me to a sense of displace. It's Europe, but parallel, distended into Sputnik's imaginative and creatively frustrated world. A sense of beneficial strangeness and emotional normalcy abounds in Warning Light Calling. The desperate and sometimes beset mind of Sputnik. Yelena's commanding but supportive, if sometimes distant stare. Threaded through is the frustration of the last 2 years, of disconnection within the realm of fictional Aarhus, and paused breath of the planet. A tripped-out, cathartic, and desperate ride through dissidents, flower guns, and space stations, which, if we're not careful, will eat us alive. That was a little review that I did of Warning Light Calling. It's just such a wonderful collection with so many disparate but connective influences. Warning Light Calling centers around Sputnik in a long narrative poem, a novella in verse. Anti-heroic Sputnik is a spacey young man. He finished studies in the history of ideas and Russian literature. He imagines his life in the context of Soviet culture, literature, and philosophy, while entangled in a problematic relationship with a girl called Yelena. The composition of the narrative poem borrows from the structure and the themes of the Odyssey and the Iliad, with a peppering of the Red Space cavalry. The setting is Denmark. It's Aarhus. Dissident Soviet literature, it feels, has been living a reclusive life away from the literary mainstream. Warning Light Calling borrows ideas from dissident Soviet literature in order to understand contemporary themes and motifs as the precariat, isolation, East and West, capitalism, healthcare, mental issues, the individual in a globalized world, and the worrying climate crisis. It is a little treat of fine literature that attempt at leaving a bad taste in the mouth of the world reader, as it seduces her or him or them into following those forgotten feelings of political Soviet pathos.
Thank you. That's wonderful words. I'm totally honored. Um, One of the best reviews I've had ever. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. It's I loved that idea of almost a beneficial strangeness. Almost, that sense of comfortable dis-ease. Not disease, but that sense that the ease of life isn't quite there. You're not quite comfortable, but you're contented in that slight area of strangeness. And kind of...
I agree with you. That's also, when you write something, you also have to be a little bit in love with what you write. At least I am. And I've been reading a lot of Soviet literature, and of course, there's a backside to Soviet. I know that, and I'm definitely not a supporter of Soviet ideology. But still, I've been reading a lot of the literature and seen some of the art and movies from the Soviet period, and it does have something very interesting that I believe that we should not forget. There are also great writers from this period that you should be studying still, and also that should be incorporated into contemporary art. And that's what I tried. Of course, I also have a background in Soviet literature myself because I studied comparative literature in the 1990s, and at the time, Soviet literature was still in the curriculum, still a big part of the curriculum, especially because some of my teachers, I believe, I might be wrong, but they were still, associated with, at least I believe I can say that, communism and at least socialism. So, and I also went on a trip to Poland and East Berlin at the time. It was after the Warsaw Pact had disappeared, but still there were many remnants of that time. And I sort of fell in love. You can sometimes you fall in love with something that's ambivalent and has a bad side too, but it also had a good side, and it's beautiful and in the same time problematic. So I wanted to, in my poetry collection, maybe I should show it. Vraeyda Literary Press has done a wonderful job. I'm so glad for the way they've designed the book. But I wanted to express or to reinvent, to reinvent Soviet imagery, metaphors, and so on, and melt them into a contemporary context. And then we had this Corona period, and it suddenly occurred to me that many of the traits, many of the tendencies that you found during the Soviet period, at least from what I know, I haven't lived there actually, but from what I've been reading and from my understanding, the totalitarianism, the that you couldn't travel across borders. You couldn't. You were sort of you lost some of your human rights, at least some. It's not a big problem in Denmark, but still, you had to lose some of your human rights in order to prevent the pandemic to spread further. So these tendencies in the societies suddenly made it come up again, and I gathered my collection and sent it to Vraeyda Literary Press. So that's some of the background, but there are a lot of other reasons for me using this this interesting setup. I don't know if that an answer to what you were asking me.
Yeah. Yeah, to that background on the collection and kind of I think that defining our terms when we're talking about the style of dissident Soviet literature
Yeah.
is quite a good thing to dive into, especially in a moment like this, because some people are not necessarily going to equate it with the same things that we might. And so having that definition of this is what I mean by dissident Soviet style science fiction poetry
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
oh,
Soviet literature is definitely a part of
yeah,
Soviet literature, and
yeah,
it's sort of embedded into it, and that's so all of the major Soviet writers were also dissidents, or they became dissidents later in their lives. So it's yeah, it's this whole area of Soviet and dissident Soviet literature that I want to put into a contemporary context. Also because I have sort of a little background in it. Okay. Should I read some of it?
absolutely, please. And people, make sure, especially those of us on the Discord server and on YouTube, please give us your questions. If you want more details on something, let us know. So the chat is being monitored. We are able to see your questions. Let me know what you want to ask. And once we go through a few of these wonderful poems with Peter, then we will have a bit of time for a Q&A.
Yes,
And now we're going to
definitely.
start.
Just ask me.
Yeah.
So now I'll read a couple of poems from the collection, and I'm going to start with the beginning, or almost the beginning. I'm going to read a poem about Sputnik is a young man. He has troubles finding a girlfriend, and he also definitely he's in some sense also afraid of love. And so that's where we start. We start with love, as Raymond Carver said, or every poem is a love poem, and in that sense, that is also correct here. And the poem is, of course, called Club Moscow in Aarhus. Yelena grabbed my harness. I was afraid of her. She was a woman of the night. Between the black iron mountains, she had a glare like sunflowers from a forbidden spring. I left my home space moon for a parachute stretched over the earthly sphere like a huge pink canopy bed. Um, of course, I'm thinking of a particular cafe. I'm not going to mention it here, but so that's the background, and it's this setting, the snow, and it's a little bit like Moscow. That's the background for this poem. Any questions for this poem?
So far, we have no questions. Maybe you could, because I know Aarhus is a bit of, it's the setting, but it's also, Aarhus is kind of a bit of character. Can you explain to our North American listeners? We actually, quite a few of the listeners right now are from North America. What Aarhus or a little Danish town would look like?
Oh, Aarhus is the second biggest city in Denmark, and it's actually a wonderful city. It's a big university there, a famous university, and many people go there from the rest of the country in order to study. So there are many young people, and it's called. Or I'm not going. In Danish, we say that it's the city of smile in some way, and that's why it's quite funny that this image is with a light in the head. So it's and it's my comment is there's not always a smile. There's also a bad side to it.
Mhm.
When a lot of young people come to Aarhus, it's of course a city of partying, a city of new acquaintances and so on. But it's also a place where people start to define themselves and see themselves in a new way because they have just moved from home. And that's also the case with Sputnik, that he has just left his home space moon, from another part of Denmark, and then he's starting to resettle and find his new identity. And it is in these cases that it can actually turn out to something problematic, and that's also the case with Sputnik. Aarhus is actually it's an old city, 800 years, maybe even older. Um, it has a big cathedral in the middle, but it's also a city with a lot of new architecture. And this architecture, I might be a little bit critical here, but it reminds me of Soviet architecture. It's these big concrete buildings by the sea, and it is on the one hand very fascinating, but it's also very Soviet style, I believe.
So we have a question.
In the middle, yeah, yeah,
We have a question from Hayden Moore,
hit
the
me.
author of Skytracer, which is being published in winter 2022.
Mm, mm.
Do you find that your characters spring from a circumstance, as in this first poem, or do you find that the character is fitted into a place?
Both. It's definitely Aarhus. They fit into this place. This is a place where you can actually experience this. There's also a lot of books about studying in Copenhagen, but Copenhagen is much more broad. That's the capital. It has other aspects that's besides studying, but especially the university environment and all the kind of schools in Aarhus makes it a very young city with young problems, I believe. But also, um, but it also this book also um, it also the character Sputnik is a typical character, I would say, which I exaggerated and developed. A typical character, typical young man who comes from the countryside and moves to a bigger city where he's going to study. So that's, I don't know if that's an answer to Hayden.
Hayden, did that answer your question? Let's see.
Am I clear? Can you understand me?
Yes, great answer.
Yes.
Hayden says great
Okay.
answer. You're coming through
Okay.
clear. You're sounding very good.
So,
So keep it up.
so on the one hand, Aarhus is it's not really. I know the setting here is Aarhus, but you have to imagine that this is a fictional Aarhus. It's not. I reinvented a lot of things. Of course I used some names from Aarhus, but still it's Sputnik's imaginary Aarhus. It's not the real Aarhus. Aarhus is different. This is Sputnik's Aarhus.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a fictional Aarhus.
Shall we
Okay.
continue on to
Yeah,
Oh
should I
Denmark's
read a little?
Radio?
Should I read a little bit more?
Absolutely, please do.
Yeah. And then I'll read Denmark's Radio. Denmark's Radio is the public radio station and TV station of Denmark, and it also has uh, there's also a part of it in Aarhus, and I'm going to read it. Maybe you should know that Denmark's Radio has often been accused of being very socialist, especially by the right-wing politicians in Denmark. Okay, let me read it. Oh, Denmark's Radio. Now we've been talking all morning, drill stick and German techno, neither of us with the required edge for scoring at Club Moscow. I've never been focused. I know that so well. Don Paris means nothing to me. Really? Don't you want to leave him a message? Spacey Peter, all I need is Denmark's Gostella Radio. I'm concerned about your inner radio. You believe in redness. Let's change beds and play the Soviet Troika again. So,
Excellent.
yeah, there's a little bit of development here. The first poem, Sputnik has just met Yelena, but in this poem, they've sort of ended in the same bed, or at least two beds, and they changed beds, so you can imagine what's going on. But they are not, they're not. They haven't been a big success as Club Moscow. That's really a place where you have to be tough and have an attitude in order to meet somebody. So they've both left this Club Moscow without scoring, and now they have each other. So
Well, that's a kind
yeah,
of
that's
scoring.
that's the situation. It's
So
kind of what?
that's a kind of scoring. You have
Yeah, it's kind
somebody
of
around you.
scoring. It's,
Yeah.
many scores have started in that way. So that's what happens also to Sputnik and Yelena.
Yeah.
And you can see they're playing with this the Soviet metaphors in order to understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
The Soviet troika, there's the troika, but that's also Don Paris. Yelena would probably have wanted to be in bed with Don Paris instead, but that's not so easy always to get the one you want. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and here you can also, that triangle of love is also what's going on in the Iliad,
Yeah.
in between Helena and Don Paris,
Paris,
and I
Menelaus.
believe it's Menelaus.
Yes. Now Hayden says enchanted but grounded in reality. Love it.
Yeah.
Hayden also says
Okay,
union
thank you,
through
Hayden.
exclusion. Yes.
So maybe I should read the next poem.
Please do.
Yeah, it's called Danish Dream, and it's normally we talk about the American dream, but this is the Danish dream. So let me read it. Maybe there are some Americans here. Hopefully they will like it. Danish
Oh.
dream. Come on. I'm also a liberal John who likes to have sex in the forest, on the little mattress in the inner room, when it's freaking hot summer and the steaks are on the grill. Soaked with American marinades in the US suburbs where we can live a quiet life with no existential themes and a garbage can full of dirty condoms. But holy shit, Yelena doesn't like I'm reading William S. Burroughs' dirty novels because he was a crazy fuck. And because she's afraid I might be a crazy fuck as well. But come on, I say to her, I'm no William Tell. I'm the liberal John of your forest. I can go deep into the woods, only wearing my lumberjack shirt. I can shoot cuckoos in the clouds. So, yeah. So the American dream living in the suburbs could actually be a Danish dream that we want to copy. Much, much dreaming in Denmark is actually dreaming towards being Americans, I would say, in an indirect way. We see so much American television and are so oriented towards American culture that many of our dreams are based on American values.
Hmm.
And so then I found it funny that Burroughs is a very interesting character in American culture. Much of the writing technique of this book is based on Burroughs' techniques, for example, the cut-up technique. But also some of his ideas that language is a virus. So it's the corona is present in this book, but the really big virus here is language.
Yeah.
So that's also one of the themes that I borrowed from Burroughs. And yeah, Cuckoos in the Clouds sounds a bit like the famous movie by Jack Nicholson.
And flew
I
over
sort
the
of borrowed
cuckoo's
those
nest.
ideas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how
Any questions?
vocabulary has this wonderful sense of mutation, the same
Yeah.
way, vocabulary mutates, idioms
Yeah.
mutate, everything. The way that we
Mm.
approach language and use language is so
Mm.
transient in a way. The way that a
Yeah.
virus mutates and the way that American marinades
Also,
smell in the summer.
yeah, yeah, and also marinade. Yeah, there also
Yeah.
the whole. The reason why I wrote this in English is not only because I want to address an American audience or
Mm.
an English-speaking audience. It's also because when you walk around, I noticed it when I walked around in Aarhus during the pandemic, where everybody was walking outside. There was the only place they could meet, so they were allowed to walk around.
Mm.
And then I noticed many people were speaking English because there's so many Danes love to speak English. So and they are quite a lot of foreigners here as well. So English was, I mean, every third I met in the center spoke English to each other. So it's also a comment on that. That's why I don't write in Danish in this collection. I write in English because so
Yeah.
many people speak English
Oh,
with a certain dialect. It's a certain Danish English dialect, you could say.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I know when my some of my family members who don't speak Norwegian, they were in Norway with me a few years ago, and they were like, we thought that, we wouldn't be able to communicate everything like that. The second they said one word, people were like, oh, English. Okay. And yes, yeah. Okay, we got you. It was
Uh,
only a couple of people that were confused, you know. The
yeah.
rest, it was,
Yeah.
that's just the way it
Danish
goes.
people are in love with the English language.
Hmm.
Many people love it. If you come here as a foreigner, English-speaking foreigner, it's difficult actually to learn the Danish language because everybody wants to speak English to you because we love it.
We have to
And that's
practice.
also, yeah, we practice it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let
yeah, we
me-
practice it, but we also love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. And
Maybe I should continue reading a poem.
yes, please. I think
What do
Rainbow
yeah,
Forest is next.
Rainbow Forest. Yes. How hot we were the other day, lying in another bunker, getting a blooming wizard and an aura flora. We were fit as poodles in New Forest, fell in the pond, and could not help sniffing out the deep peat moss, as nature's greatest happiness dogs. We walked the rainbow in the sky, made a wealthy crane city out of our fleshy spines. Every naked flower yearned to go upstairs with us, where the mirage of the universe by a distant could be seen with every color reflected by a distant neon machine in the clouds of golden rain and utopian sun.
Beautiful. Now, we do have one question from Hayden. What
Yes,
is it about the English language? Is it its sound or its context? What is it about
both,
English?
both. I think. Of course, there are some sounds in the English language that Danes have difficulties pronouncing, but they love the sound. Many youngsters. I'm an English teacher. They love to rehearse and they love and they try to sound American, mostly as Americans. But it's also the context, especially. Uh, well, I don't know about other European countries, but definitely in Denmark we are very um, oriented towards American culture, American movies, American books, American series, and so on Netflix. So that's the background, I think, the context, but also the sound of the English language. The English language sounds of uh, cosmopolitanism, or it sounds international.
And I think there might be something to the fact that it's a little bit, there's that kind of uncouth story that the English language took a whole bunch of other languages into the back alley and beat them for their words.
Yeah,
That sense that you can get some of the Romance languages, you can get some of the old Germanic languages, there's so many things that formed English that, there's certain words. I remember when I was studying Beowulf and studying Old Norse and things, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Hey, wait a minute. There was a whole bunch of words and things that as I was intonating and saying them aloud, I understood. Um,
mm,
and I think with English, it's such, it's almost, I don't know if I should say it this way, but I think English is almost democratic in the way that it's
yeah,
been
it's open
formed.
open towards other languages. Languages.
Yeah. And it's
For
sort of
example, hygge,
absorbed.
a very recent word. There's a Danish word. It's just been imported into many English-speaking people use the word hygge.
Yeah.
Hygge, I think people say.
Yeah.
But in Danish it would be hygge. Hygge. Is that right? Do you use it?
So some people I hear pronouncing it hygge.
Hygge.
We
Okay.
know it I know like koselig,
Yeah.
koselig, hygge, things like that. Yeah. Well, I know that because, of course, Scandinavian. So it's like, oh, well, koselig.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But
Then they had
that's a
koselig.
wonderful part of English that it's so
Yeah.
open that it incorporates other languages into it.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I should read another poem,
Peace in Our
Peace in Our
Time.
Time. And the title is, of course, a reference to the Second World War and how, in a relationship, and that's also the relationship between Yelena and Sputnik, it can sometimes remind of a Second World War. When it's really, when they're really fighting.
Yeah.
And that's why it's called that. Peace in Our Time. That's in the future there will probably be peace in our time in their relationship. Okay, peace in our time. Yelena rushes up to her castle on the hill. She is looking for a new bird. Her body flew out of its cage. My Sputnik. Now the Danish satellite is famous for providing the best offspring. Who says? I think she's so masculine. Smartphones will kiss me of pure jealousy. Obviously, I think she has a hot body. Shall we dance? It's completely unforgivable to ask me about that right now. So which one of us actually got it wrong? My words have become hers, and I will do everything she says. I'm the alarm clock who has always called her across countless numbers of reincarnations. Too sweet. Once upon a time we were the Master and Margarita, or Lara and Chihuahua, or even Vronsky and Anna Karenina. But Yelena has to travel away from me and stay out on the vast moonland of pure shamans. Okay.
Brilliant.
That's how it is when sometimes you're not there. It's of course it's this poem describes the on-off relationship between Yelena and Sputnik,
Mm-hmm.
but it also describes some of the tension. What's the problem between this couple?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to tell, but it's of course something about the power and who is deciding over whom and so on.
Yeah.
And he's not allowed to ask her for a dance, but he's also very like a alarm clock. That must also be tiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Conflict.
Okay. That be part of the book further on, but at this place it's more off than it's on their relationship. I mean, so it's actually the last poem I'll read in this part of the session here is Space Jealousy, where yeah, let me read it aloud. Space Jealousy. My dearest Yelena, I hovered in space with black stars whenever you messaged me. I watched you for hours converse with the beautiful Don Paris. He answered with laughter. He hid behind the skies, watching him kiss you. I hid behind the skies, watching him kiss you, his hands on your breast. Despite my bad conscience, I floated noiselessly in the air. A black hole absorbed my bones. This poem is, of course, it's not a direct copy of Sappho. It's the poem 31. You
Yeah.
can find it in the Greek version, but it's definitely a remake of it, put into a sort of a contemporary or future setting, with a lot of words from astronomy that I used in order to describe this situation. And yeah, so I found that also very suitable because the first part of it actually reminds me of Iliad, where the whole conflict between
Yeah.
Menelaus and Don Paris and Helena. So I thought that the Sappho poem would be a good way to end this relationship, at least for a time, because
Especially
now something else
since
happens.
we only have fragments of Sappho. We have very few completed works of Sappho. There are thousands of fragments, some of which are a few characters on a page, and that's it. So this idea of inner fragmentation while a relationship is breaking down, while it's kind of joining into that theme of, Paris and that sense of another place, another thing to whisk Yelena away. It just all combines together, and it creates an incredibly heteroglossic and nuanced approach to Yelena and to Sputnik and to the entire thing. Now, I'm just going to take a second here and double check. I just got a little message on my studio stream. The people that are watching this on YouTube right now, if you're live, please let me know that you can still see it. Because Discord, we're still going. We've got this. And I just got a little message. I just want to make sure. There we go. We're good.
Okay.
All right. I just wanted to double check. Now, we're going to take just a second. We're going to give Peter a chance just to reclaim his voice, have a sip of water, that kind of thing. All good. Yay, we're all good. So for those of you who want to get a copy, hey, I'm Marina Carlton. Hello, how are you? Welcome to the stream. And so glad to see you. So glad to see you here. Now, if you want to get a copy of Warning Light Calling, which I hope you do, it is available on paperback and ebook. It is available worldwide. The easiest places to get it are Saxo in Scandinavia, in Denmark, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. It is available on Smashwords as a digital copy and on the Amazon Kindle store. I would ask that if Barnes & Nobles is near you, or you're able to bring it in, that kind of thing, those wonderful alternatives are fantastic, and we have quite a good relationship with them. But it's a very good looking, it's a very sexy looking book. It's a very good looking book. Look at that. That's
thanks to you at the Vraeyda Press.
Thank you. That was a joint effort between myself and Marissa. Marissa Wagner is our art director at Vraeyda Media and Vraeyda Literary. And so she makes everything pretty. I scrawled, I go, okay, here's my notebook and this is what I want. And I kind of put things together and then I go, this, and she goes, okay. And then she runs and makes it 7,000 times better. She would be here, but she's actually teaching. She's teaching Tibetan refugees right now. So,
okay.
Yeah, she's doing the good work. And Marina Carlton has been lurking. This is wonderful. Now, Marina is another one of our wonderful authors and a journalist as well. She's a former journalist. And now we're going to ask some questions. So again, if you have any questions for Peter, let me know. Please hit him, not hard, obviously. We don't want, especially not the mouth. We need that. But hit us up with questions. And I have one to get us started. Does writing energize or exhaust you?
Oh, it energizes me. Because I use it as a stress regulator in some way. When I have, sometimes when I have a lot of work or just a lot of thoughts, I just sit by my computer and write it all out. And then I can sit and analyze what I've been writing and find the good imagery and the pictures that I like and just delete the rest. And then I work with this as a piece of granite, as a stone mason. I from these words, I make a portrait or a poem. So in the beginning when I write, it's just a stream of consciousness that I go through again and again and again and again and again and change and put it into, for example, into another context. Change it again, and then I look it over again, and then at a certain point I see I have a poem. So the beginning of my process is to just write, and I write normally. I write difficult thoughts, strange thoughts, even paranoia and anxiety. I write that on the piece of or on the screen. It resembles a piece of paper. And then I read it and I can see that with my common sense that this is ridiculous, or but it's not only ridiculous, it's also interesting. I can use it creatively. and then I transform it into poetry or a story. Sometimes it's also a story. So it doesn't exhaust me. It actually energizes me. It's writing is a kind of catharsis for me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, we kind of skipped the gun on this. You talked a little bit already about the Odyssey and the Iliad. And we have a couple questions from Marina. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Marina? Let me know. What is your favorite thing you've written so far?
My favorite thing from this collection.
Let's narrow it down. What's your favorite poem in Warning Light Calling?
Warning Light Calling. Yeah, it changes a little. It depends on the situation, but I definitely like the last poem I'm going to read, the Red Space Cavalry, because it's so provocative and it's ironic and it's transgressing what you're actually allowed to say. I think so. I like it a lot because it's funny. I laugh myself, which I shouldn't, but I like that poem. But I also um, love. There's another poem that I even sometimes I'm yeah. It's a little bit in the same category. Mayakovsky Eye.
Mm.
That poem I'm going to read that poem later as well. So those two poems are my favorite poems from Warning Light Calling. I've also written another collection.
Yeah.
Danish Northwest. That's also a couple of poems that I'm really happy about.
And that one is more about hygge and things like that, isn't it? It's a little bit more.
Those two are opposites.
Yeah.
This is the anxiety and this is the hygge.
Yeah.
So they're sort of connected in some way.
Yeah.
But still, they are very separate also.
Excellent. Now, Hayden has a question. The metaphors you often use draw from the earth and the cosmos, antiquity and modernity. Do you find this combination, games with time and space, allow you to push further with your writing?
Yeah, as a writer, I always look for metaphors or imagery that make me write or make me produce something. That's I always if you just copy another big writer from the contemporary period, and if you just copy metaphors that are used in our surroundings, then it becomes a cliche. It's very difficult to avoid the poetry to become a cliche if you just use the contemporary metaphors. So you have to use something else and combine it in a new way, creatively, and be creative in that way. So if you combine something that's not that usual, for example, Soviet metaphors or dissident Soviet metaphors with Greek metaphors, with pandemic, with something that's futuristic, that's at least new to me. There might be many other authors that have done that, but I don't know them or I haven't read them that much. So that's new to me, and that's interesting to combine that. And then I use, of course, my own experience, my own feelings that I've been writing as a background for that process. I don't know, was that an answer? So I'm always looking for new areas of metaphors that I can use in order to avoid cliche.
It still reminds me of T.S. Eliot, who would say you can't really know how to be a futurist. You cannot really see into the future until you know the past, until you understand the allegories and things like that we've had in our past. And something like the Iliad, something like that strain between Paris and Menelaus and Helena of Troy, and just this constant dig and pull, those images, they're pervasive for thousands of years for a reason. And although we are not copying those things, when there are allusions to them spoken in our truth and our authentic voices as authors, then it becomes almost as if those metaphors, those experiences are a mirror in which we could better see ourselves, in which we can better see the modernity and post-modernity and future modernity. So
yeah, the reflection is stirred a little, so you see things in another way. You know, Aarhus is not a Soviet country. It's not a Soviet regime, not at all. But when I distort it a little and look at Aarhus through those lenses, I suddenly see something new. I see it from another perspective, and that makes me think. That makes me write a little bit more. And so it's so when I, for example, use the Soviet imagery, it was in order to change my own perspective.
yeah,
But
yeah.
also one of the basic reasons for the reason for that I used the Iliad and the Odyssey is also this is a very old story and it works. And I don't know if I'm a good storyteller, but when I know if I use this old story, the perhaps the oldest story in the world, then I know it works. So I structured this poetry collection through something that has been tried before and that we know uh, work works.
Yeah.
So that's why I use it.
And yet, by structuring with that sense of, Helen, Paris, Menelaus, that sense of, in this case, Yelena, Sputnik, and Don Paris, you've created something completely different. You created something with space stations and chosen one gamer gods and, the love machines and, children waiting for buns, and it just creates this wonderful, that really is part of what science fiction should be. It's taking those things that can then reiterate change through those images.
That's the basic technique in this story: displacement of time and space and history.
Yeah.
So in order to and this displacement, but this displacement is also I would even call it cross displacement. Um, this is also what we, at least in the Danish context, literary context, we saw. Of course, there are quite a few authors who have been writing about Corona and how they experienced Corona, and that's what we also saw in the literature here and the movies here during the Corona. That in order to understand Corona, you had to displace the displacement of time and space was a fundamental part of understanding the situation.
Yeah.
So, for example, our prime minister used imagery from the Second World War, and journalists, in order to understand the political experiments from the government, they used, U.S. policy or U.S. culture from the 1960s in order to understand some part of it, a part of it, and some also used the Soviet Union or Korea, North Korea, as a way to understand how it is to live during a pandemic
Yeah.
period. So we used all these different historical times and places in order to understand something completely new. And that's why the Corona is also a part of this collection.
Yeah, that sense of isolation, that sense.
Yeah.
Now, Hayden says this poetry/story reminds the reader that the fundamental particles, metaphors, human needs are universal in time and space. And yet the way you write it, it makes it new again. And it really is that sense that although an archetype is an archetype and it exists, there's the orphan, the wanderer, there's the magician, there's the warrior, we've got these archetypes, but the way you write it makes it new, and
the combination. Combination.
Now I'm going to keep us going, and we've got a few more poems.
Yes. Should I read it aloud again?
Yes, please. What do you think, guys? Do you want to hear?
We were talking about Corona, so I would like to read a Corona poem.
Here we go.
There are quite a number of Corona poems in this collection, also a story. But it's not, not all of the book is about Corona. It's only a part of it. There's also something going on before Corona. It's a lot going on after the Corona. So But in the middle of the book, there's a couple of Corona poems and stories, and I'm going to read. It feels like. It feels like. Comrade Corona has sent me in isolation. He has deprived me of my freedom. With a cotton swab, my space helmet is crushed apart. Stabbed as a trowel into my internal soft mechanics, I cannot say a word. I swallow my brain in the humanitarian show trials. Testing is my consciousness. The state has to protect itself against its citizens. I belong to the system among the secret files of experiment. Jab, jab. The body papers are stamped. Vaccine passports are the only legitimate access to the open, closed, post-pandemic society.
Something very controversial here in
Yeah,
here
maybe
in
it is. I
BC,
don't
you
know.
know.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's
controversial also in Denmark. I
that
know a lot of
idea.
people are not angry about it.
Well,
Yeah,
it's you don't want to create two classes of citizen. I think
no,
is the main
yeah,
ethical thing to kind of keep in
yes,
mind,
yes.
that just by
But
virtue of having some people having the right to go certain places and other people not, then you're
mm,
automatically creating a class system which
mm,
is causing a lot of strife, especially when it has to do with people
yes,
feeling one way or another about something going into their own bodies. It's
yes.
but it gets into fascinating things. It's,
And maybe it's not a problem in this situation, but
mhm.
now it's legitimate to do it. So
Yeah,
what about the future? So you can do
yeah,
it in other and less problematic and more problematic situations. You can do. You can still require this.
yeah,
Uh, you can invent different kinds of passports,
yeah.
not only for vaccine but also for other things.
Well, we have a driver's
And
license that lets us,
in
it
Denmark
gives us a
also,
passport to
yeah, you
drive.
have, yeah,
We have a
and
passport for travel. We have, if it's a membership store, then you have
yeah,
a passport membership. Like, but there's a lot of that. But
mm. And
it's,
also that it's not, we believed in the middle of the corona that it's going to be totally open, but it's not totally open, but not yet at least. Still closed somewhere, and it's opening and it's closing, so we're still in the middle of it.
hmm
And then I used comrades because I thought there's something basically communistic about a pandemic.
yeah,
So I thought that was interesting. And
yeah,
yeah, I used Borrow's internal soft mechanics, and the space helmet. I don't know.
yeah.
You must have felt that when you got the test and put into your to your it's put into you stabbed as a trowel, right? So
Oh,
you must have experienced that.
my spouse
And
experienced it
and
more than
then I
me, but
saw suddenly, at least here in Denmark, but also in other countries, that it was not only they did not only invent all these requirements and procedures in order to protect the citizen. There were a tendency also here in Denmark towards that the state invented certain proceedings in order to protect itself.
yeah,
And when it does that, that's to me is totalitarian.
yeah,
So when the state invents something in order to protect itself, you have to be very careful at least
yeah.
when the state does that.
And you have to be careful of the temporary nature of the situation.
Mm.
Although now, people say various things about, how long Corona will be with us and all of that. But ultimately,
Also,
a government having a massive amounts of power over people and over
mm,
people's
mm,
bodies, that should
mm,
never be a permanent fixture in any government
no,
in
no,
the entire world.
no.
Like,
And,
you
and,
know.
and, and think about it, how easy they did it.
Yeah.
It was so easy. They did it in a couple of minutes. They took away a couple of human rights. And I believe
Mhm.
it was probably necessary. But it's also very dangerous
Yeah.
because if we have experienced that you can take away basic human rights that we thought were totally fundamental.
Mhm.
You couldn't touch them at all, but In a couple of minutes, they were taken away.
Like that.
So, so we have to be careful. We know that. We know now that they can be taken away
Yeah.
in a
Yeah, and I think it's something that a lot of,
minute.
especially the younger generations coming up, who
Mm,
may not remember certain regimes and certain political
mm,
entities like the USSR. I had
yeah.
family on both sides of that. I had family that refugeed to Canada, and I had family that
Mm,
stayed behind or were, and family in Poland and East Germany, as well as,
mm,
as well as Canada, and
yeah.
and if you have kids growing up, they're 20 years old, and
Mm,
it was something that happened 10 years before they were born.
mm,
They have no concept of what was happening at those times. And
mm,
now we're seeing something like a global pandemic,
mm.
and we can see people getting sick. We can see that there's a reason for these measures, but at the same time, we ought to be
Yeah.
cautious
Let, let me
of the
underline. I'm not
measures.
critical of
Yeah.
you had to do something, of course.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I'm just
Hmm.
pointing out that we also have to be careful
Yeah.
because what the governments did were probably necessary, or
Yeah.
not only probably, they were necessary. And the Danish government here, I don't know in Canada
Hmm.
about in Canada, but here they did many good things, and they met this new threat with the right measures. But we also have to be very careful. We also
Yeah.
saw that we had some severe punishments going on
Yeah.
and during this period. So they did the right thing, but now we have to be careful
Yeah.
because we know now that these basic human rights are not so permanent as we thought.
Yeah. Very much. Now let's move to another poem. We
Yes,
are running in through our
yes.
time,
Right,
having
and
a
then
good time.
yeah, I'm going to read Mayakovsky I, which is one of my favorite poems from this
Yeah,
collection.
it's a fun one.
Mayakovsky I. He could drive the combine harvester in the huge grain fields as if it were a masculine revolution. The assembly line of complex machinery gathered the grain and shot it out the side pipe to unload into waiting wagons. In the shadow of his dark mountain eyes overlooking the fertile fields from the wheelhouse, a smoking cigarette glowed in the night as a warning light ever calling. The industrial hammer and sail seized the battlefields of nature. Ears of grain flaunted against the sky, soon to be cut down by the cutter bar of steel. And what for? Food for the people. His starry fists stirred the soft soil.
What for? Food for the people.
Food for the people.
Love it.
The
Now,
Vygotsky buns, so that's a continuation to this.
yes.
Now we've been harvesting, now we're going to make the buns for the children. So the Vygotsky buns is also a comment on how the Danish school system where we still use Vygotsky. But okay. The Vygotsky buns. Outside the breakfast bakery in Aarhus C, the children are waiting for the buns. This is their zone of proximal development. Aren't the buns soon ready, they ask, their noses pressed against their pain. Every sun-spring morning, Danish culture settles in the children through the language of class consciousness in mighty, newly constructed concrete apartment blocks near the roundabout of the military parade. The ideologically bewitched bakery has a rational and a materialistic agenda. The baker's freshly baked buns, with butter, make small souls alive and happy. These buns are the future of the people.
Something as nuanced as a
Uh,
bun.
Sorry?
Something as nuanced as a bun.
Yes, not a bun in the oven.
Yeah.
But still, that's also a part of the image.
Yeah.
Um,
It is.
yeah, it's and it's suddenly occurred to me, not in Denmark, but in many parts of the world, there are after this is after the corona in the poetry collection, that there's a lack of food and lack of all kinds of stuff. So we see a Soviet
Hmm.
supermarket with only a few goods
Yeah.
on the shelves.
And you
Okay.
wait in line for hours to get your
Yeah,
loaf
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
bread, and then maybe or not,
So
it'll be there.
so they
You
were
know.
more contemporary than I originally thought.
Yeah. Yeah. It's.
Cosmonaut 8000. This is, the description. The whole Sputnik is a cosmonaut. That's at a certain point I thought this collection should be called Cosmonaut or 8000. 8000 is the postal code of Aarhus city. Okay, Cosmonaut 8000. The cosmonaut goes grassy in his intergalactic bed in outer space. His heart is a weightless, vanishing nothing in the last large, airless vacuum, and he becomes a modernist avant-garde 8000 poet. So I use some of, if you read it sometime, you will recognize that I use some of Mayakovsky's, use his way of writing, his way of structuring his
Yeah.
stanzas. So it's not only in in the content that I use Mayakovsky and the Soviet poets. I also use them as a way of structuring my stanzas.
Yeah. Well, the visual
Okay,
is so
now,
important. You know, in
sorry.
a poem is a visual piece of art on the page. You know,
Yes,
it's
yes,
the
it's
form of
very
the
visual.
poem. The form, the way that it's placed, you know, how many stanzas and what flow it takes.
Mm,
Those are all part of the joy and the beauty of poetry.
mm,
So, you know, something that free form can sometimes go this or that.
mm.
But that structure is just part of the pristine nature of crafting a poem. You have to think
Mm.
of that. So,
Yeah, you should definitely pay attention to the stanzas.
mm-hmm.
Every word has a meaning in a poem. That's what I try to say to myself when I write a poem. That it shouldn't be a word that hasn't got a meaning. Everything has to mean something. Everything has to have a certain place in the grand message of the poem.
Yeah, it's something that, well, I mean, Hayden might be able to say something to that too. As
Okay.
an editor, I excise as many words as possible. I am very much that kind of editor that condenses prose. Condense, condense, condense. Does that word have, if you can remove that word from the sentence and the meaning of that sentence is still sound, that word did not belong there. You know, it's condensing it down, condensing it down.
Mm,
But it's something that, although I learned it, you know, from greats like William Gibson and Thomas Merton and different kind of influences that way, it was something begotten upon me by poetry.
mm,
And I'll never forget my instructor at university, my favorite instructor. She would sit there perfectly poised, beautiful red lips and perfectly coiffed hair, you know. She was an elderly woman at the time, but she was just perfect. And she said about your novel, if you cannot write the entire novel in one poem, you don't know your writing well enough.
okay.
If you can't write the
Yeah.
poem, you don't know the novel.
Mm,
And yet you can flip that around and create a novel out of a poem. You know, they're so condensed, there's so many layers in a poem that you can kind of open it up almost infinitely into a whole bunch of other things. And that's what I see a lot with the Warning Light Calling.
yes, of course.
Lots of stories.
You've also edited it and
Yeah.
edited it and so it's not something. Sometimes, as a poet, you miss a word. You see you didn't notice that that word
Yeah.
was actually could be deleted. But so sometimes you need help in order to see what can be deleted
Mm-hmm.
and condensed. But with a joint effort, we I think we have ended up with a couple of poems that actually are so condensed and also more um, um, when it's so condensed, it's also the the message is also more clear. You can dive into it again and again when it's more condensed. That's hopefully that you can.
You can take your time and basically kind of wake it back up. You know, you take that condensed piece of poetry, and then you can study and kind of tear all those little things apart and see all the layers, and then you're sitting there for an hour looking at, you know, a 6-line poem, but it's got so much it's a galaxy in the palm of your hand. You know, it really is, especially
Yes.
with a lot of the poems in Warning Light Calling. It's that sense of the macrocosm in this microcosmic form.
Mm-hmm.
This tiny pinprick of a form.
Okay.
There's so much.
So how much time do we? Can I read the? Should I read the Red Space Cavalry now?
Let's finish off with, we are ending. So basically, our hour is upon us. I'm okay with going on a little longer. That's totally fine.
So a little bit longer, that would be okay. But should I, so I'll read the Red Space Cavalry.
Yeah.
Now. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Yes, let me just say that this is one of the poems I've been a little bit afraid of what especially Americans would say, what they would say to this poem, because it's not it's a little bit anti-American, at least in the first reading. Hopefully, people would see that it's a totally ironic poem. But let me read it, so then we can discuss it afterwards. The Red Space Cavalry. They nuked all the ladies in the outer hemisphere, chopped down entire civilizations of aliens, tough as Danish Vikings. They gathered the reins and tapped the pyramidal monolith in front. The atomic grenade had burst the frontal lobes. And then they stopped, just outside the moon, and pointed and said, "Comrades, Apollo 11 landed here in 1969, sent by a hostile nation. Let's shoot the moon into gravel. Then no one will remember the inferior victory. Ha 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 ha." So I'm sorry about that, fellow Americans, but yeah, this is basically a very ironic poem that shows, you know, how soldiers react when they are in a war, how they, you know, are cocky and they don't see any limits at all. So that's what I want to portray. How, and also, I don't know if you noticed the title. Hopefully that reminds of Isaac Babel, a Russian writer that I love so much, one of my favorite authors. It's all I believe in English. The short story collection. The only thing he wrote is called The Cavalry, and it depicts a young man who has just finished studies and then has to go with the Red Army, the Soviet Army, to war and fight in the great battles. And then he's of course with the glasses and a little bit, you know, very like a student, not used to being so physical, both towards other men but also towards women. He's very inexperienced, and it's the same situation with Sputnik. He's also come to Aarhus, and he meets other men in particular who are much more experienced, and he feels like this, that they have nuked all the ladies in our hemisphere, while he hasn't, of course. So that's the background, you know, this cockiness. Uh, so it's not actually in order to say something bad about American culture. It's in order to depict how young men behave when they are together and they are, you know, and they feel without limits.
Yeah.
Am I clear? That's you know, the background for the poem.
Yeah, I'm clear on it too. I think the poem has that sense
So
of
it's also a
irony
critique
very
of
present
masculinity, I
forward,
think.
especially
Yeah.
with the ending with the, you know, the ha 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 ha
Yeah.
ha ha.
Yeah, so it's also, the poem is also a critique of masculinity and how masculinity sometimes um, how masculinity sometimes is when you are among young people, young men especially, and especially soldiers, how they behave to each other, how masculinity develops among them.
All right. So
It's
that
also fascinating.
it
That's the
is.
other part of it.
It is very fascinating. And that is the last poem we have for today.
Hmm.
It is been an hour and 12 minutes. My
Okay, I'm
time.
sorry about that.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. I say we round it out to an hour 15. We have time for
Okay.
one more question
Yeah.
or comment if anybody just wants to comment. Now,
Yes.
this question,
Please do. I would like a comment or a
yes,
question.
questions, comments. I'm looking at you, Noah and Mope. Actually, speaking of what happens when guys are together, you should see our Twitch streams with Noah and Mope. Noah says, I liked the stuff. Good.
Oh, thank you. I'm
Very
very
good.
happy.
Very good.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing from
Mm.
Marina, Carlton. And I'm choosing a question. All right. Do you hide any secrets in your books only a few people will find?
Yes, of course I do. Not only a few, but many, many secrets. As I said before, many of the poems have an original background in my own feelings, even though I might have turned it into something completely different. The background might show, and that's the secret, but I won't tell. And there might both. It might only be. It might also only be me who knows.
So
Maybe
it's
not.
not a treasure chest like a treasure hunt map that somebody could take and go around Arhus and be like,
Oh yeah, this also because all of the mythology, you can
yes.
you can start looking for Greek mythology. You can start looking for Soviet allusions, and you can look for Danish allusions. You can look for a lot of things. You can analyze this poetry collection from a Greek perspective. If you study ancient Greek literature, you could do a comparison between this book and the Iliad, but also other Dante and yeah. Now I might be a bit of over the top, but yeah, you can. I believe that I've hidden a lot of uh, secret symbols and so on in this text in order to also to make sure there's a lot of analytical work hidden in the poetry collection for future readers.
Yes.
I don't know if I succeeded in that, but that was one of my goals.
I think you succeeded. I think all of us here can say we believe you succeeded and we can't wait to see
Thank you.
more. Now, this has been our virtual launch of Warning Light Calling. For those of you who are watching this in the future, Warning Light Calling is out. You can get it at any of the bookstores. In the description box below has links to Saxo, Barnes and Nobles, Waterstones, places around the world where you can purchase Warning Light Calling. The digital edition is published via Smashwords and the Amazon Kindle store. So you have a choice there. And this has been our wonderful Peter Graarup Westergaard. I hope I did not butcher that.
That's okay.
Good.
Gold, actually, but still,
Okay, closer. I
yeah.
have to I have to be closer. And my
Peter
name is
Westergaard.
there we go. Westergaard. And my name is Lis of Vraeyda Literary. And Peter, the last thing to say is yours. Whatever you want to
Okay.
say, go for it.
I'm just so happy that you allowed me to participate in this and also read some of my poems. It is always a wonderful opportunity for a poet to actually read the poems aloud. Poems should be read aloud. They are a kind of music. Hopefully you could understand me. I'm not a native speaker, but I tried as well as I could to read it aloud in in the English language. You should perhaps imagine this my English as a kind of Danish English dialect. Um, Yeah, I'm very grateful. I'd like to thank you. To say thank you to you, Liz, and to your team.
Thank
You've
you.
done a wonderful job, and hopefully you will read my book. It's not that long, so you should be able to find time for it. I hope you're interested.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody. And we hope you have a fantastically creative day.
Yeah, may you have a nice day.